So we're going to go ahead and get started. Do I need the mic or do I not need a mic? Bobby, are you good? Okay. All right. Bobby's always okay. So it's the Thompson Free Library and my personal pleasure to introduce Morgan Talty, who is there we go. He is a citizen of the Penobscot Indian Nation who hails from Levant. He is the author of the national best-selling and critically acclaimed story collection Night of the Living Rez, which won the New England Book Award, was a finalist for the Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers, and also was a finalist for the 2023 Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction. Damn you, Julie Otsuka, for winning.
Who was it?
Julie Otsuka.
She did win that. Yeah. Yep. Can you guys hear me okay? Or do you need the mic? Mic, yeah, we'll do the mic. Continue with the accolades.
Okay.
Make me feel good.
So anyways, his newest book, which just came out on June 4th, has been called Remarkable and Spellbinding by Time, a best book of the summer by Time, is the best book in June at the New York Times and Chicago Review of Books, and Tommy Orange called it utterly consuming, fire exit absolutely smolders. So once again, Morgan Talty is here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like do you hate being praised and getting the accolades in person, or?
I'm getting more used to it. It was strange. I don't know, when Night of the Living Rez came out, it was not, I didn't expect for it to do what it did, and it is still, just to put it into perspective, short story collections, either it's like a Karen Russell style one. Well, no, Karen Russell sells, but short story collections very rarely sell more than 5,000 copies in their lifetime. And so that I was like, oh, that's my expectation. And since then, I think there's it sold close to 80,000. It's a huge number, you know. And I was like, I never expected it to do that. So I had to get used, because my expectation was, oh, okay, this is what typical writers will do sometimes. Their first book will come out through an indie press, and then they'll use the sales, and their agents will get them a larger advance at a bigger house. And my advance was $3,000 for Night of Living Rez, which I used to buy in an industrial size swing set in a pool. And very responsible, I know. And so that's all I thought it was, but it turned into a very weird thing. I don't know why. I don't know, but so I got used to hearing the praise and turned it into an act. If it went on way too long with accolades, it would do the review. I would read. I would twist the reviews, take bad reviews, and be like, "Here's a more objective picture of it." But then I settled down for a little tiny bit, and here I am again, where I'm feeling that weird, people are looking at me and stuff.
So last night you were posting on Facebook and Instagram and stuff some bad reviews, and it took me back to the Night of the Living Rez when you were doing that as well. So we were chatting back and forth a little bit last night about them, and I took the liberty of
you
today.
Did. Yes. Oh no! My God.
I took the back of his book and photoshopped it to include some of them are just shitty reviews, and then some of them. There's one on here from Kasia, my wife, who she said she loved the book, but her quote is pretty good too. Do you want to read them?
Yeah. Oh. Am I? I'm good. Yeah, I'm doing just great. This is so cool. How did you do this with just
Canva, man? Canva does anything.
I have Canva. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's how I responded to her. It was Debbie or no? Deborah.
Yeah, I think it was. It was
Debbie, but then I changed it to De, and then I thought this book was very dry and sometimes even dull. Only finished it because I had nothing else in my queue. And then why? It's just the letter Y and then Grace. So I'm always like, why Grace? Horrible, boring book. Novel reader.
This is the Amazon one. I don't think you've seen this one. This is new. Okay. It's really good though.
Oh, I hope it. Okay. Time called this the best book of summer. If that's true this summer, for people like me who love captivating novels, I haven't seen that one.
It's good, right?
And then this one's yours. Okay, is Morgan Talty okay? The book is good, but that was a lot. I went into a Morgan Talty dark hole. I also read The Glass Castle at the same time, and it wasn't an upper moment in my life. I'm taking advantage of Canva. Like,
yeah. It's really good. Shout out to Canva.
Keep this?
That is, so I printed that out here, and then I bought a $1.25 frame at Dollar Tree.
Did you cut it out of the check?
Yeah, Phyllis,
Okay.
I'm gonna need reimbursed for this, for all of it. The paper, the time, everything.
I'm making more of these to make sure they go with any other event.
Yeah.
So, I really appreciate this.
Yeah. No,
this is, yeah.
Anytime I can make some kind of dumb joke, it's a win for me, especially professionally. So
this, I will say, hopefully this is the case every time. I imagine it must be, but the last time I was here was in conversation with Lisa. Yeah, and she had given me a gift, and I don't know if you know what was in the bag at all, but in the gift was really nice paper, but it was a list of just Indigenous people who left really nice comments about my book, and how it helped them and all that stuff, and like there was like a lot of names on there, and it was the highlight of my like in the top like 3 things that have ever happened on my tour. And now we have the top here again is the top one at Thompson Free Library. So really so
we go all out here. We have the librarian of the year for the entire state of Maine, Michelle Fagan, is in the room. She also hates being complimented, so she's mad at me right now.
Okay. You do a wonderful job.
Yeah. All right. So we're probably going to get into some heavier stuff later, but one of the things that I really love about your writing is how you take depictions of very mundane things and just everyday things and the way you describe them. So I have a few examples here that I'm going to read through. It was late spring. I sat outside drinking coffee and not smoking because my lighter had run out of gas. Fog rolled out of the water that divided the Penobscot Nation from the rest of the state of Maine. I was waiting as I usually did. And then you have later, it's in the same part at the beginning. I was going to make eggs and some seasoned hash and think about all this. When I cut the washed potato, I nicked the tip of my thumb real good with a knife and got blood all over my hand that said, forget it. So I really love the way that you write these really elaborate scenes. Because I was reading your bad reviews too, and a lot of them do say like, there's no plot in this book. Like, what is the point? But the scenes are so elaborate, and they're full of these inner monologues and minutia, and it's all beautifully written. And I was talking, Kasia was an English major in college, so I run things by her because I was a history major. So I wasn't
an English major, by the
way.
Okay. So, yeah, maybe that's why it sucks.
But I was comparing it a little bit to Murakami, because Murakami will write something, and have you read First Person Singular at all? His short stories that came out maybe like 2-3 years ago?
I may have read a few of them, not like from the collection, but elsewhere, if they'd been published before.
I believe so. So some of his works, he'll write like a 30-page short story, and the entire summary of it is like a guy sat on a bench and he talked to a woman that he thought he knew, but then he didn't. But it's just, you get these elaborate pictures with all of these new questions, and it's hinting at untold backstories. I really feel like in your books, there are a couple hundred characters that you could write a whole other book about. So how would you describe your writing style, and is that something you're going for, to try to paint the entire scene, or?
I don't know where I'm going.
Okay. All right.
Really, no, like that's sort of like my approach with writing in general, is like I might have an idea, right, about what I want to do. Whether I execute it or not is an entirely different thing. I suppose, like, I don't know, I've developed a weird or strange philosophy on like writing, and I didn't smoke anything before I came here, I promise.
It's legal now, though, so that's fine.
Well, I was talking about other stuff, maybe.
Oh, okay.
I've just been thinking in like, one of the reasons why I engage with like reviews and stuff like that is because at the end of the day, just like for me, it doesn't really it doesn't really matter. Like, you know, it's like the book is out there, it's out there. People will respond to it how they will. And I just become another reader of the book. Like, it's just it's like I wrote it, yeah, and I can defend it, and I will if I have to, right? But my philosophy on writing has become this, and I haven't fully been able to articulate it, because it's like, if you take every human off the face of the earth, right, the stories still exist. Like, there's still animals and stuff, but there's no humans. The stories still exist. Elements of it, right? Yeah, like, if we're just an omniscient, you know, narrator looking down, you know, there might be two squirrels fighting over something, right? So we got some conflict. We have setting, obviously. The plot might be them preparing, right, for something. They don't know what's coming, but they know it's coming, but they don't know how big it is. But then, like, an asteroid hit dinosaurs, for example. They weren't writing stories, at least I don't know, but you know what I mean? So it's this thing that I believe, if you take life away, though, but then the question becomes, what is life? You know what I mean? So it's like, it's hard for me to go that far back. But we as humans got lucky and stumbled into it, right? With some sort of capacity to engage with it. And it's been the way that we've been able to make sense of the things we don't know, right? We think about oral storytelling as really, or like even hieroglyphics or like drawings. And so in that way, I've sort of always thought, I approached it this way. I didn't know it until kind of recently, but it's like, when I'm writing, I'm talking to something that's like outside of me. And that's why I'm always like, I just kind of let go at times, and let like, when people experience resistance, like, how many of you write in here? Yeah, like, have you ever experienced that moment where, like, the story just, like, won't go? It's because, it's because the story is telling you, turn around, we want to go off this way, you know? And, like, I always kind of say, it's like, nothing fails. Like, yeah, sure, it fails, but, like, every page you write is just a mile on the odometer towards the city where the story is going to happen. And the story is kind of a GPS in a way. And it's like, that's sort of how I approach drafting and revising, and like looking for like little areas where I think the story is telling me it wants to do something. So it's almost like a partnership with this entity that has pre-existed us, that it's this ancient thing, and that we have actually invented elements that it's allowed us to use, like form and structure, right? Because, like, the story didn't give us the novel, we created it out of what it allowed us to use, if that makes sense, right? So it makes sense then, I think, that this book, you know, when people say it doesn't have a plot, for example, like, this book I feel is very like circular, you know, it has this very strange way of moving, and that's the only way I can write. And that's how Night of the Living Rez came out too. I didn't know it back then, but I knew I was talking with something. Again, I didn't smoke anything, I promise, but like, logically that makes sense, right? Thinking about it, it predates us. Storytelling does.
Well, Fire Exit doesn't. Not much actually happens in the present. A lot of it is like flashbacks, or it's, I mean, maybe like half. I would say, did you say it's like half, maybe?
Yeah,
because it's a lot of going back into his mom and Frederick, and then the time before with his kid's mother, whose name I'm
Mary.
Yeah. Yes, I have the names written down, just not on this page.
I know I'm just now remembering names.
Yeah.
Once you edit a book and it's like done for a while, you're forgetting.
Do you just like put books away and you don't think about it? And
until it's out?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, at least for this one I did, yeah.
Okay.
There's scenes I'm like, oh, did you like that scene? And I'm like, that wasn't in the book. I'm like, oh. Because I wrote the book 5 times from scratch, and this one that you have here is the 6th version that I wrote. So I'm compulsive in that way. Yeah.
So you didn't reuse any between the revisions, or very little?
I did, but it was all stored in... It just made it, like, when you write a first draft, it's like trying to juggle 100 balls. You can't do that. It's like everything falls. So you have to, like, do it in rounds to get the balls out of there until you have maybe, like, 3, and then you're on draft 4 rewrite, and everything is sort of, like, like, you know the people well enough, you know their histories, their backgrounds, in a way that you would have known like your own history, your own family history, so you can just draw on it easily enough. But I also had a timeline because it's a very like peculiar. Yeah, I should have brought it, but 4 pieces of paper, printer paper, taped together, a line, and so
I'm just imagining one of those like string and push pins on the wall type of things. Yeah.
I did just recently I went Jack Kerouac and bought a whole scroll of paper for
Nice. Yeah.
Not to write, but just to like do a timeline for stuff. Yeah.
So how long did the book take you if you had to write it 5 times?
The idea came to me in 2015. I actually wrote the first draft at the same time I was writing the first draft of the story collection, Living Rez, and that like blows people's mind for some reason. I don't know why, but like it was so bad. The draft was like really bad. Third person omniscient. Okay, who wants to read that? Like really 450 pages, and it was not good. But
it was as bad as Deborah thinks this one is.
Deborah probably would have liked that one. That seems to be more up her alley.
Yeah. You should write like the kids version of your books, or some, like the condensed version, or the Disney version, or
isn't that kind of like what Klein did with the Orphan Train? I think there was like the adult version, and then there's like something like that. Yeah. But that's a good book. But I should do that. But where is he?
We got off the rails with Orphan Train.
Yeah. But no, the book, I started writing it in 2017, completed the draft in 8 months, I think it took me. And then I let it sit for about a year, I think, while I focused on the collection, really was the main thing. And then in 2019, I went back, and it was like every year I kind of had like every 8-9 months. 9 months. Sounds like I gave birth. That terrible comparison. I would have a new iteration of the book, and then I would just do it again. I would wait a little bit, and then I go back. So from 2017 all the way until my last attempt, which was this one, was in 2021, I think. Or 2020. 2021. And that one was, writing that one was hard, because it's like, when you get to that stage, at least for me, I've written 4 other novels besides this. They were all the ones that you have to like get out of the way before you can like attempt to do a good one, I suppose, or a boring one. And it's so hard. Like, my routine is like, I can't write fewer than 500 words a day. I can't write more than 1,500. Like, that's just me. Like, I figured that out. Less than 500, fewer than 500, I feel like a loser. More than 1,500, it's like I've worked out too hard, and like I'm just too sore the next few days. And it really, like I can't do it. But then you have, like, for me, I have to stop. But then I have to think about it all day, but resist the urge to go back and work on it. And then you have to go to sleep, and you actually have to think about it. You have to dream about it. And it's just a nonstop, constant thing. So that took, 6 months maybe of getting it there. And I was tired after. I was like, bruh, I'm looking at Deborah here. I was like, bruh, I'm tired. I'm done. So it took a good, from the initial idea, 6 years, I'd say.
And how much did it change in that? Because if I think back to where I was in 2015, geez, that's a
how much did the book change?
Yeah. But like as you changed, like you're in a completely different situation now than you were in 2015. And did the book evolve with you and change with you, or was it a singular type of thing?
I just became a better writer, I think, by the time I had reached this, final draft. Like, I even look back at Night of Living Rez, and I'm like, I shouldn't have done that. Like, I shouldn't have done that. I'm like, that, no. And I actually want to write about it, because it's like, as an artist, as somebody not in selling books, but just like trying to produce something of like quality. I always do that. I look back at past work. I'm like, that wasn't right, even if it was published. That's just me. And so I will look back at this one and be like, novel reader was right. That was the longest summer. But that's just how I am. I never. If I feel like the moment you feel comfortable as a writer, you're either writing like formulaic stuff, right? Like maybe like romance, like stuff that has structure to it, which there's no problem with that at all. But like if it's literary fiction, if you're striving to go outside the bounds of what's the norm, that you're continuously getting, better at it. But you're continuously getting better at writing those formulaic things too, getting faster, right? Yeah. So it's like, what's her name? She busts out like romance. Who is it? Who?
Probably Danielle.
Yeah, just sits down, busts one out.
Or like James Patterson just writes an outline.
Isn't he dead?
No.
It's like some of them are dead though, aren't they?
Stuart Woods just died, but he has people writing his books still.
Yeah, there's like people who just like write their books for him. Yeah. Somebody did that for mine. No. Yeah, but that's my process, and I always see a project through from beginning to end. Like I just have to. Just it has to get out. So,
do you want to read some of the book?
No, but I will. Yeah.
Okay, all right. We forgot that part of the agenda.
Yeah,
previously
we did. Yes. I left my other This isn't my book. My copy. My copy got left at Odyssey Books in Massachusetts, and it's in the post office, which I haven't been able to get to, and they're holding it hostage. And I like that one because I had people sign it. So with this one, I had people sign it. So I'm gonna have to rip this out and staple it, like in my next one. But that one had like the pages marked. I don't know. What do people want to hear? How many people have read the book? Okay, so a couple people. All right, so I got to read something that'll really convince you.
Yeah, no spoilers.
No.
Yeah.
All right, I'll read this. I'll read when he first meets Bobby.
Okay.
So Bobby, he's like the Fellas of this narrative in a way, if you've read Night of Living Rez. But so it's on page 25. So Bobby, just for some context, is really kind of Charles's like in the contemporary story, the narrative as it's going forward, his only real friend, like his only real person he's in touch with, besides his mother, who's slowly leaving him. I met Bobby in AA in the spring of '96. Back then, Bobby had few people in his life, which is still the case today, I guess. He'd been divorced 3 times, no children, and he was going through that 3rd divorce when we met. AA was held in the Elks Club on Main Street. Bobby had been attending for almost a year. I can't say he'd been clean for almost a year, because I came to learn he was still drinking some nights a week. When meetings were over, a lot of folks stuck around and smoked outdoors if the weather was fine enough. I had gone to 4 meetings so far, and when that 4th one ended, I didn't want to go home. I felt a certain strength the more I was around the building and those people. And I don't mean a strength put towards not drinking, but rather a general spirited strength. Maybe to live, I guess. We were all outside after the meeting, and we stood in a circle under an orange street light, some of us smoking. Some were waiting for rides, some were waiting for those who were waiting for rides to leave, and some, like me, didn't know what they were waiting for. In time, everyone went... there's the typo, there it is. In time, everyone went home. In time, everyone went home, one after the other, until it was just Bobby and me and this guy whose name, I think, was Melvin or Kelvin. He wasn't there too long before his ride showed up. The quiet was sharp when he left. He'd been the one talking to us, keeping the conversation going. Bobby, this non-native, asked if I was waiting for a ride, and I told him no. I have a truck, I told him, and he said he did too, that his wife had dropped him off in it, and so he was waiting for her to pick him up. But she probably ain't coming, he said. I had no idea then that he was on his 3rd marriage, and I had no idea then either that 3rd marriage was unstable, like something stacked too high. I guess I should have known something wasn't right when she didn't show up. I ended up bringing him... Oh, I could have guessed it. I ended up bringing him home, which was the beginning of me always bringing him home and picking him up for meetings. He didn't live too far from the Elks Club. That night, however, he made me believe he did. For most of the drive, he kept saying, "I appreciate this, I do. And I can't thank you enough. Really, I can't." "No problem, no problem, no problem," I told him over and over again until finally I just said to him, "You don't gotta thank me anymore, I don't mind." He told me his house was 3 miles down a dark road with very few streetlights. It was out near the border of Overtown. "Just keep going straight," he told me. "I'll tell you when we're almost there." "Take a left," he said. "Take a right." Bobby seemed nervous. He kept tapping his fingernails on the window. "Take this left," he said. "I'll tell you when to turn again." He tapped on that window. He asked me 3 times if I had a cigarette he could bum. The first time I told him I was out. I said the same thing again when he asked the second time. I thought maybe he hadn't heard me, but when he asked that third time, I said to him, "What's the matter with you?" He stopped tapping on the glass and he shook his head. "I'm fucked," he said.
My mom's right there.
Oh, okay. "I'm fucked," he said.
Thank you for repeating it for my mom.
I actually ruin this line every time I read it. It's not supposed to be read like that. This is like the Harry Potter Goblet of Fire thing, where they're like, "Did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire?" when it's not actually him yelling. So let me reread it how it's actually supposed to be read. "I'm fucked," he said. And he said it as quietly as somebody would say it who was truly fucked. I just can't get it right. I stopped the truck on the side of the road. We'd been driving for 20 minutes. I pointed up ahead at the stop sign. "It doesn't matter which way we turn," I said to him. "Both ways bring us back to the same road we were just on. Where is your house?" "We passed it," he said. "We passed it?" I asked. "Look, I'm sorry," he said. I started to think that Bobby was a liar. I wondered about all sorts of things. Did he have a house? Did he have a wife? Had she dropped him off in his truck? Did he have a truck? Was he even an alcoholic? "I can't go home," he told me. "Then why are you making me drive you somewhere you can't go?" "I'm sorry," he said again. All right, it's up there. Just drop me at the curb. I can go there. Really, I can." He told me not to pull into the driveway, but to park on the street. I did. He got out of the truck, and he didn't say anything to me. I watched him walk across the front lawn, the grass up to his shins. He was halfway to the front porch when he turned around and looked at me. He waved me off. The front door of the house opened, and a woman, who was his wife, he'd tell me after, while on the way back to my place, screamed at him. I rolled down my window to listen, but I couldn't understand a word she was saying, not anything Bobby was saying when he spoke over her. It was all in French. But when I recognized what she threw at him, this thick glass bottle, I didn't need to know what they were saying to know what was going on. Bobby ducked and dodged as he threw the bottles, and he looked to be returning to my truck, but he wasn't. He searched the dark grass for a bottle, and when he found one, he pelted it in her direction on the front porch. It shattered against the house right above the porch, and glass sprinkled down on her. Only then did he run back to my truck, because she ran after him. "Go, go, 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 go," he yelled, hitting the dashboard. I could have decided not to be a part of his mess, especially after his wife hit my truck with a bottle. I could have decided to drop him back off at the Elks Club. Could have told him to sort it all out himself, to leave me out of it, but I didn't. I told him he could stay the night at my place, and he said no, he couldn't do that. And then he asked if I could bring him to work in the morning. And I told him I could, but that he might get there earlier than he'd like, since I had to be out and on the road by 4 a.m. I didn't sleep at all that night. When we got home, Bobby used my landline to call her. But he didn't speak to her for very long before he handed the phone to me. "She wants to talk to you," he said. Her name was Heather or Gail. I can't remember which. I didn't have to talk to her. I could have hung up. But Bobby kept saying, "Tell her, just tell her." And I wasn't sure at first what he wanted me to say. But when she accused me of drinking with her husband, I knew what he wanted me to tell her. "It's not like that," I told her. "If your husband's drinking, it ain't with me." "He is drinking," she said. "Well, it ain't with me," I told her. I don't know at what point she believed me, that I was telling her the truth. where she didn't believe me but just got tired of asking. But eventually she stopped talking, stopped arguing, and I thought she hung up. Hello, I said. What do I do? She said. What do I do? Right then, I realized I knew very little about Bobby, about this man who was sitting on my couch in my house. I saw him holding Elizabeth's stuffed elephant, the one I bought and tried to give her, yada 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 yada. And Bobby mouth, you have kids? He won't stop, she said. Why can't he stop? Are you asking me? I said. How did you stop? What made you stop? I wanted to say what had made me stop was myself, but that wasn't true, and I didn't know what had made me stop. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was what I wanted, or maybe it was just time to stop, something unexplainable working below the surface of my being, or maybe it was the guilt I felt about my father Frederick's death, wanting to get clarity enough so I could finally tell my mother the truth about what had happened. Thank you.
He's one of my favorite characters in the book. One of the other things about your writing that I love, of course, like everyone in Maine loves Maine, so that's a real thing. You can play the same game you play with Stephen King, where you try to guess which town is which in your books. So yeah, is Overtown Bangor or is it Old Town?
Old Town, yeah.
Okay, I figured it was Old Town.
It was,
or is it like a Castle Rocks? Is it like one of those situations where it's an amalgamation, like Stephen King's? You know
it's
what I mean?
sort of. I see Overtown so far only as just like Old Town, like the up to Han. I mean, I would even say going all the way up to Ames. You know, I think that's technically. Well, Ames ain't there no more, but you know what I'm talking.
Yeah.
I don't know what's the some dollar store or something, but I just remember Ames and my mom not letting
Ames.
Me. Yeah, I just remember my mom wouldn't let me buy Eminem CD there when I was little. I was like 5. I was mad. But Overtown is actually how we set it on the island growing up.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We didn't call it Overtown. We called it Old Town. But like if somebody was heading that way, we'd be like, "Oh, you going Overtown?" Yeah. Just because of the bridge. That was just how we like colloquially said it. And I noticed it in early drafts, and I was like, "Oh, I'll just call it Overtown." Like, yeah, sounds cool. So
yeah, that works.
Yeah. And Jim's Little Big Store is Tim's Little Big Store, you know, like on the Coral Town. So.
You didn't want to pay royalties.
Didn't want to pay royalties.
No. But it's obvious that you love all of these locations, and you love the state, and you love this area, and the people. I mean, Bobby is a guy who could live in any town in Maine. Has 100 Bobbies, honestly.
Yeah.
And there's another guy that I said we were going to talk about called just Shovel Man. I think, does he have a name in the book?
He does. I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, we just refer to him as
Rhett or Brett. He can never remember. Charles can never remember what his name is.
Everyone is, and those ones are actually close, but a lot of them are like two completely separate names. Yeah. But I just love when you introduce Shovel Man, and I have it here, and you say, her neighbor, a tall, skinny guy, learned Louise called Shovel Man because he was always outside shoveling snow, or when there wasn't snow, dirt, which he used to keep his dirt driveway flat, was outside, sitting on the bottom step to his small house. And then he has a bunch of stuff in the yard, which of course he does. And then at the end you say, I ain't selling anything right now.
Yeah, so he lives next door to Louise, and if you buy the book and read it, you'll see it a little bit more. But he's a dumpster diver, and you know, does anybody have friends that are dumpster divers? Got one.
Occasionally, yeah. I am the shovel man, kind of.
Yeah, they find good shit. Yeah, there's. I mean, well, first I'll go back to the comment about just like being able to place these people anywhere in Maine, and to a degree, I feel the same. If you strip away the Penobscot identity of the characters in Night of Living Rez, I feel like they too could, you know, fit anywhere in certain parts. Like I just think of Maine as like Maine literature hasn't really hit no pun intended, mainstream, you know, commercialized market, right? Yeah. And I think because most people want Maine to be this exoticized, let's go to Bar Harbor, let's go to, you know, look at let's go walk on what is it? What's the Bar Harbor beach that just sucks?
Michelle Sand
Beach. There we go. Yeah, your mom. My mom brought me there once, and me and my cousin ate. Well, we went there a lot of time. Me and my cousin ate all the sandwiches, so she had one left, and she was eating, and a seagull came and grabbed it. But my mother grabbed the seagull and was literally like punching it, and she won. She won the fight, but she was like, I'm not going to eat this. And people were filming her too, so she's always like, she always had said before she always told us, she's like I'm probably on some like Asian stupid American TV, something like that. Yeah. But I think people view Maine as in a certain way, but you go up to the counties, right? You go up into these other areas, and there's there's an immense amount of poverty. There's alcoholism, opioid abuse, a lot of stuff, and so I'm always going to write about addiction. Like, I'm always going to write about those things. And, like, they're not going to always be the thing driving the story forward, right? But they're always going to be in the background. And, like, that's what I think my work is always, like, how do you categorize it? Is an interesting thing. Like, I'm curious, like, how people will categorize it. Because it's a native guy, me, wrote a book, but with a white narrator.
Yeah.
Right? With mostly white characters.
Yeah.
But there's the native element. Like, I'm curious. I'm like, what are people going to do with that? Like, are they going to put it in, like, the Native American literature section?
Yeah.
Or are they going to put it just, like, in American literature?
They should put it in, like, there should be a white trash section.
Really, though? Like, even that is, like, starting to become a subplot. Like, you don't walk into a bookstore and be like, where's your white people section? Yeah. You don't, right? It's just...
I think I read the one article that you were talking to Tommy Orange about white people literature, and I think I texted you because I was like, man, the concept of white people literature is great. Like, why do we love, like, women being murdered? That's what women like white that's white. That's like white literature. If you look at it as a subset, the way you would look at other, like, when you look at Asian literature, when you look at Black literature or Native literature, it would be ridiculous to, like, try to classify it based on race.
Yeah, it is, and it's actually super national. There's a very really hard, like, nationalism is like we associate it as a bad thing. It's a bad thing when it's the power, right? I think nationalism is a fine thing if you were, like, an oppressed subject. And so I had my students in my native lit class, their final project is to create a syllabus where they're in groups. They have to create a class and a syllabus and books and everything, and they have to riff off the title, How to Read White Literature. And so it changes their thinking, right? Because it's like, it changes it so that white literature then becomes not the default, right? So we begin exoticizing white literature, right? Because that's what, a lot of, the, colonial Western thinking has done. And when I say white people, I don't mean like white people. I just say anybody whose all of our minds have been colonized by the idea of these ideas. So
as white people as the default, basically.
Yeah. And white, I think, is more of a stand-in for just a way of thinking.
For just literate, like, it's just a stand-in for literature in general. Yeah.
So, I don't know where I came from that, but yeah, I think the book is, for me, it's a main book. But it's a book that, nonetheless, I always try to strive for that one thing that makes us all connected. The common denominator among us all is that we can feel, right? And it's like, if I can bring that out in a book, then I've done my job. Because everybody can feel something, right? So it's like, if you can relate to it in that way, then you're good. I've done it. I've done what I'm supposed to do, except for these three people. No, not really three, because yours just is funny.
No, there's still three people there.
Oh yeah, there is. Yeah. It was just your.
You have dozens of 1-star reviews on Goodreads. Just FYI.
I have a what?
Like dozens of 1-star reviews
on Goodreads.
Yeah, the only social media app that I enjoy.
I do check them. I like them.
My friends and I, and Keisha was there for it. She refuses to join Goodreads, but over Thanksgiving, we were trying to treat Goodreads like an actual social media app, and we were, like, sending each other messages through book reviews and stuff like that.
I tried to give it a shot. I couldn't. I'm like on there just for my own self pleasure.
Yeah,
and Yeah.
It's like LinkedIn for you, though. It's like
Yeah, like LinkedIn. Who uses LinkedIn? Don't raise your hand if you use LinkedIn.
But yeah, even with like Night of the Living Rez, when you had mostly native characters, I related to a lot of the characters because it's not. I mean, it's from a certain perspective, definitely, but it's not something that is unique to native culture, if that makes sense, and isn't something you're offended by.
Yeah, no, I don't. Like, I think to write from a position of culture, I think is not a good idea, because then we run into, I'll quote two native scholars. There's David Troyer, who talks about exoticized foreknowledge, right? Like, all of us, we pick up a book and we read the synopsis. Maybe it's by an Asian American. We may have some preconceived ideas, right? And they can affect the way we read the text. It's true. And he does this test with his students where he's like, asks his students, they read a story by Sherman, that guy. Yeah, he canceled me, by the way. I'll tell that story after. He Every Little Hurricane, from his first book that won the Penn Hemingway Award, which is a terrible book. I mean, there's good stories in it, but anyway, there's a line in this first story that goes, Victor watched his father cry huge, gasping tears, Indian tears. And Troyer asks everybody, all of his students, what do Indian tears represent, right? To explore symbol. And just as a writer, if I see a symbol, I go the other way. Just FYI, don't go into a symbol. Go away from it. But all of them are like, oh, it represents, the suffering at the hands of the white man, and like all of this stuff. And it's like, but there's nothing in the text to suggest that, right? That's what Sherman Alexie was so good at. He was so good at preying on a predominantly non-native readership that perhaps carried guilt, right? Like this imperialistic nostalgia, which is true, right? And that's why he was so popular. That's not to say all of his work is bad. His memoir was beautiful. His short stories were good. Some of them, were great. But there's that, and then there's another, Louise Owens had said, he's like, most non-native readers come to the page expecting a colorful, comfortable tour of Indian country, and I just refuse to give that, because like, if you put culture first, that's what you offer. You just get to drive around and like look in people's like drawers, and and like you put on a performance. And the sad thing is a lot of native people have had to do that to survive, to perform. But I think for me, I'm like, well, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna write my work the way I write it, and then when I talk about it, vocalize how effed up it's been.
Yeah.
Put a target on me. I don't care.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's happening in a lot of different types of literature too. Is like, you're not just getting books and stories about the character being part of a certain demographic. There's just a story that has people in it, and it's doing a lot more, I think, to normalize everyone in society, because we are one society. And
and like the fact that nobody has, like, maybe in one thing I've done, has brought up the Gizus, one of the characters in here, who's gay. Nobody at all talks about like sexuality at all, even though that is a big part. Not a big part, but it's has its like moments in the book. Like, nobody talks about it, and for me, I'm like, is that good or bad? And I think it's good in this context, because it suggests then that people just saw a human. You know what I mean? Like, they so
there was a lot of. I think Gizos is one of the people that you could write a whole other book about, because he goes on a whole journey. He starts out with his, and I don't want to spoil too much of it, but his father is abusive towards him. I think his father sees that his son is gay, maybe even before his son does, and it gets very abusive. But then Gizos comes back afterwards. I don't want to spoil much. And he's
much later in life.
Yeah, much later in life, and he's really like kind of found himself, and he's been on a journey, but you don't. It's just kind of hinted at. There's not like a
yeah. I've actually written short stories of him, but he's like sort of
really?
different. Not this type of Jesus. I know him now, and like now I'm kind of like maybe I know what to do with him in those stories.
Yeah.
So.
But even Jesus' father.
And Jesus, by the way, in Penobscot means both the sun and the moon. So when you're reading it, I don't know if that'll help your interpretation. If you have an assignment or something.
Yeah. Write that down in your notebook.
Yeah.
So his father actually kind of accuses Charles of being in a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
And whenever that happens, his father is very influential in the tribe, and Charles's not father but stepfather Frederick says, "You should know I don't believe him, not one bit of it. But it doesn't matter what I believe. It's what they will believe, and they will believe his story, believe the display in front of his home." So that really like gets to, especially in small societies like this, like small towns or a small society on the reservation, like how important is truth, the actual truth, versus people's perception of the truth. That's a lot of what I got out of that story.
That specific story?
Well, like with that, it doesn't matter what actually happened, it's what people think. Yeah. And that kind of plays through the whole book, because he's trying to hide the fact that his daughter is his daughter, but then at the same time he wants her to know the truth, and it goes back and forth with.
Yeah, I mean, and that's not even in a small scale, but a large scale, right? Like we think about politics, right? Yeah. And I'm not going to bring anything up about politics right now, but I'm just saying, like, what's the truth versus what do we perceive to actually, what is the actual truth versus what are we being given, right?
Yeah.
And Leno, and I don't think this is a spoiler in any way, he's the chief of the tribe at the time, so that's why he holds a lot of power. But in the display you had mentioned was this big incident that occurs where this accusation happens. But I think the whole book is about like what's true and what's not true, but what can be true and be like left untouched, and what can be known and unknown. And the driving factor here is like, I'm just sort of like, I was so fascinated in this idea of like, what don't we know about ourselves, right? That we've lost in some way. As an indigenous person, I'm missing a lot of things, right? Like there's a lot of stuff I don't know, but all of us are missing stuff. I don't know if I tell you, but I have a third book coming out, and I've already sold it. It's a memoir actually, and I was in Boston doing a reading, and my aunt came. Did I tell you this? No, maybe.
I think is this the one about her working in the office or no?
No.
Oh, because
no, this is actually unrelated to this at all. But it's related to the fact of like knowing stories. But I'm writing a memoir, and it's about raising my son. But my mom and dad are dead. They've passed away, and we look at the baby book, and like everybody on my wife's side is like alive, and then everybody on my side is just like dead, except my sister. But like even my sister hasn't met my son Charlie yet, and so it's like, damn, he doesn't, so I'm writing this book about my mom and my dad, and like trying to bring them in because they were fascinating people who loved so much, but had so many afflictions, from mental illness to addiction, all of it. And I always say, I'm like, when my kids are older, well, Charlie for now, I want them to read the book and put it down and be like, oh, I feel like I've known my nanny and my papa my entire life. Like that's like what I want. But when I was in Boston, my Aunt Anne showed up, and my Aunt Anne, great Aunt Anne, was telling me a story about my dad that I'd never heard before, where I don't have to get into it, but basically I was like walking to go find food, and I just started crying, and I was like, wait a minute. I was like, this book is also me being like, this isn't a book just for Charlie, but it's also like for me to figure out who these people were, like both my mother and my father. And there's so much I don't know about them, and they're gone, and I can't ask them. So it's like, that's sort of like at the heart of this
Mhm.
book is like, that's his struggle. He's like, what do I tell her that she should know, but should she know it, it will jeopardize everything.
Well, a lot of it is. So I love when he asks his mom about his birth father, because Frederick is his stepfather, but he asks his mom. He's been out of touch with his mom for several years, right?
A long time.
Yeah, a long time. And they finally get back in touch. And one day he asks his mother about his birth father, who he doesn't know anything about, really. And she says, his name, Brian. Isn't that a boring fucking name?
Is anyone named Brian here? No Brians?
Okay, so we can, okay,
we can just kidding.
And then she says, I wonder where he is. And that's it. So she just says he has a boring name. That's all. And it's really funny because he knows nothing about his birth father. And whenever he tries to find out about it, he gets 3 sentences and it's like half a line.
Yeah.
But then he spends the entire book trying to tell his daughter his story. So it's a really good dichotomy. And he even says of his daughter's stepfather that he is presumably doing a good job, as Frederick did for him. Yeah. So it's like he's trying to heal what happened to him, where he knows absolutely nothing about where he came from.
Yeah, he has no knowledge of, like, he is this weird, like Charles as a character is a weird product of federal Indian law and policy that has shaped Indian country, which is all of the federally recognized tribes. Like, really it is, like, because he wouldn't be where he is if things were different, if different decisions had been made in the Supreme Court in the early 1800s, for example, and all the subsequent ones after. In the same way, Louise Erdrich's the Roundhouse wouldn't exist if the Supreme Court hadn't taken away tribes' ability to try non-natives who committed crimes in Indian country. And along with a couple other things, like, those books wouldn't exist if colonialism hadn't wanted more power, you know. So he's a product of that. He is, and he happens to not be native, right? Which I found fascinating, because I was like, this isn't just like, indigenous problems aren't just indigenous problems. You know, most of them are, but not all of them.
Yep. Right. And that kind of gets into blood quantum, which is what the book bases around. Do you want to talk a little bit about? I don't want to explain to you what blood quantum is. That seems
you can
very colonial of me.
Yeah.
But
are people familiar with blood quantum? So all that, like, I mean, every tribe had its own, prior to contact, had its own way of functioning and keeping track of, like, citizens, right? Like, not really citizens, but like, if a person would marry out, you know, there were benefits, you know, how all of it. But I will say it was less chaotic and damning than the West had it structured in a lot of ways, with slavery and stuff like that. That's not to say tribes didn't own slaves in the U.S., but blood quantum, though, if you're a federally recognized tribe today, from the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act, the federal government was like, here, tribes, you should adopt a constitution, you should model yourselves after us. And you know, they were like trying to promote tribes and their sovereignty, their inherent sovereignty that the U.S. has recognized and still recognizes as predating the formation and existence of the U.S. But they just keep taking away sovereignty. And so tribes that are federally recognized have to keep membership, and it's up to them how they choose to keep membership. And they have to report it to the federal government. So that's sort of just a requirement. Blood quantum came out of the colony of Virginia in the 1700s, which was founded by John Smith, you know, the guy, Pocahontas, John Smith, in the 1600s.
He seems good in the movie. Was he a good guy in real life? Or?
No, he was a shithead.
Yeah.
He introduced coffee also, I guess.
Oh.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe that outweighs the no.
No.
But in the 1700s, they implemented it was mainly for African Americans. It was to keep, basically, so white men could continue to rape black women and make sure that if they had babies, those babies were not entitled to anything. So it was all about blood. It was about this blood percentage. And they were like, well, why don't we do that with the natives? Right? You know, and like, what if we dilute their blood until they become not native anymore? Right? So it's such a weird thing. It's like, imagine just sitting there and in like 1 second, like, you're just not native anymore, and you're like, but I'm alive. You know what I mean? So it's very weird. So that came into play, and it spread. And most tribes, about 70% of tribes today, use blood quantum in their own way. So some tribes will have, you know, to be a citizen of the tribe, for the Penobscot Nation, it's 25% minimum. So when we became federally recognized in 1980, everybody was set at 100%. And then if you had children with somebody who didn't have any native blood, you know, it went down to your children were half, and, you know, and it kept going. And then you have, so for me, I'm a quarter, and my son, Charlie, is a descendant because my wife isn't native at all. So he's entitled to certain things for only so long. And I mean, he can get a tuition waiver for the UMaine, you know, if he wants to, if it's still there in 18 years or something. But so blood quantum is the way tribes have chosen to keep track. And it's like, why? Like, we literally, like, tribes have the inherent power to shape it however they want. Like, you could go in and be like, choose someone in the room and punch them in the face. And then if you did it, they'd be like, all right, you're a member. Really, like, we can do whatever we want. Tribal nations have, from the Supreme Court has ruled that it's up to us how we set it. It is. And so, but indigenous people freak out when they hear about, you know, raising or lowering blood quantum, which happens because if a population decreases and we get close to extinction, even though we're all still here, right? Because the blood's been diluted enough, they'll raise the blood quantum, but we don't know how many descendants are out there. So people think that they're going to come in and like I don't know, sleep in their extra bunk bed. Like, I don't know, like people, they panic. And it's a valid thing to be concerned about, but we have the ability to structure it however we want, you know? So that's what blood quantum is. Not all tribes use it. Some use patrilineal. Most of the other ones use patrilineal. Some use matrilineal. Yeah, there's different kinds of stuff. I'm curious to see if there's any weird ones out there. But
yeah, but you describe it, and you talk about it in the book, but in some of the articles you wrote about it as a genocide where no one dies, yet everyone dies. And white people get to mourn and grieve the people they caused to be gone, which I thought was a really succinct way to put it, because you're like choking the culture out by defining it on such narrow terms when there's not really a reason to.
There's no reason. There is absolutely no reason. It's the same reason it's still the same thing as it was in 1700. It was to dilute in order to steal land, right? Because if they were no longer native and they became white, the property they were on was sellable. You know, they could buy it, right? Depending on where you were in the United States at that time. But yeah, it's the same system, and it's like actually like I feel like a super highly like advanced technology that I'm like surprised. Well, I'm not surprised white people ever figured that out, but not white people, but those people, you know, those ones, the bad guys, yes. But like it is, it's like it's just adapting, and it's like I don't know, like it's hard to just, it's like an alien technology in a way. I don't know.
Yeah,
even though it's just an idea.
Yeah, and so the whole book kind of revolves around it without, I think it mentions it once or
twice. Like once or twice it says the word. I don't even describe what blood quantum is in the book. So
I think you do. You do in the foreword, I think, but not in the actual.
No, the foreword where
or in the intro. There's some place.
Is there? Oh yeah, I think maybe I do mention it briefly. Yeah, but I don't really dive into like what it is.
Yeah.
They really screwed my synopsis up. Well, because if you look at the back of Louise Erdrich's The Roundhouse, for example, it tells you exactly what you need to know, like the setup of everything. And that's kind of how I wanted it to be here. But I couldn't wrap my head around about how to describe this book, so I told my editor just to write it. So I guess it's my fault, actually. So if you're reading it and you're like, what the fuck is going on? It's my fault.
So what do you think would be, and I'm not asking you to solve all of the problems in the world, but what do you think would be a better way to base either tribal membership or tribal identity around rather than? Because in your book you have characters like Charles who feels very native even though he is 0% native, and then you have characters who are native but have moved away and haven't thought about their native identity. And so you have people on both ends of the spectrum, people who are culturally native but not blood related to any natives, but then you have people who it's mostly a blood connection. And I think that's something that happens. I mean, Ancestry.com makes billions of dollars on white people trying to find out what kind of white people I am. So
I can't answer. I don't know. Like, I really don't. I mean, like, well, I always say this, like, as an artist, it's my job to post questions, not answer them. But even as, like, not as an artist sitting here right now, like, I don't actually know. I don't know what that would look like, because it's like, one, we are trying to grab what we've lost, right? While at the same time moving forward. But then we have to confront the fact of indigenous folk who have no experience in any of that, right? And like, what do we do with, how do they become incorporated into the culture that is secretly theirs and has been in their DNA for a long time? Like how do you awaken such a thing? And it just seems like a huge task, and it is. And I don't know, like, how it would go. I don't know. I really don't.
It kind of, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. You said you don't like symbolism in your books.
Yeah.
But
you can read it that way, yeah.
Yeah. So in my incorrect view of it, a lot of the characters, you're trying to talk about them as a whole person. So you have, like, because Charles's daughter Elizabeth has his blood, and that is literally it. He saw her once when she was very young. But you're saying that that's a part of it. But then obviously culturally, Charles feels native, and he feels like he belongs more with Frederick than with his birth father. So it's like all of us are many different parts that make up one person, maybe.
Can you say that last part again?
We're all many different parts that make up one person.
Yeah.
So it's like you are a book. You're not a chapter in the book or a story in the book, something like that.
Yeah. We're literally just made of stories. Like, I think it was N. Scott Momaday who says it. It's like, all we are is nothing but stories. Like, that's the thing that's made us, and we're slices of it from all over. I just have always been, the more I wrote this book, going back to where I was a long time ago when I first got the idea, I had grown as a writer, but I'd also had grown as as a thinker. I'd been teaching, and I'd been reading a lot, and I just grew developmentally. I got smarter, right? Like, no, I'm still dumb, but I do. I'm really stupid when it comes to most things.
You have one skill.
One skill. Yeah, it's this and killing spiders in my house, and my wife tells me there's one.
Nice.
But yeah, it's like, what? He's afraid of spiders?
No, it's not.
No.
Really?
I don't kill spiders. There was one in our outhouse at camp that I was keeping. He was like that big, but Keisha made me kill him the one day because. All right, yeah, I don't even kill him. I just like pick him up and move him because I don't want to.
My mother-in-law is like that. It'll be like, it could be a scorpion, and she'd be like,
yeah,
and I'm like, no, I don't know. I just see a bug. I'm like, oh.
I make very weird and arbitrary decisions between what are good animals and.
Well, no, my wife will actually be like, she's like, can you take this bug outside? And I'm like, sure. And I like turn the corner. I'm like, I don't know. I just don't want to deal with it. I'm like, I don't know. Now I feel bad though. And then I do actually feel bad. I'm like, I killed a life. You know, I took a life. Like it didn't
for your convenience.
For my convenience, yeah. And she's like, she put it outside. I'm like, you know, and I'm like washing my hands of like the green stuff of the lightning bugs or whatever.
Several places outside.
Yeah. But yeah, these characters, like these people are just they're fragmented, right? And that's such the hard thing. Like identity is such a hard thing to talk about. Like it just is. Like it's such a difficult subject to talk about. Like even in college classrooms, right? Identity, gender, all of it is becoming, you know, like pieces, right? That we have to figure out, you know, how to align them. But at the same time, it's like, do we have to do that? Like, is it putting more pressure on us to have to say who we are and those sorts of things? I mean, this person asked me this fascinating question. They were like, how do you tell people you're native? And the way I took the question as like, how do I express that I'm indigenous, right? Because like, if you saw me just out and about, you'd be like, this is a white guy, you know, or I don't know, what do I look like?
Italian or something, maybe?
Yeah. I'm just like, I don't know, Puerto Rican or yeah, you know, I just so I walk and I'm like, oh, ¿cómo estás? Sí. ¿En qué onda? And yes, I actually speak Spanish, but no, actually, no. Like in Connecticut, when I visit my dad in the summer, I would get really, I would get tan to the point where people thought I was Puerto Rican. Same with my mom. My mom was always dark, and her sisters, when they lived in Connecticut and went to school there, they didn't, you know, they weren't black, they weren't white, and, you know, they weren't like in any other group. But skin-wise, so we think about skin as it being a marker of like a demarcation of who you might be, right? They didn't fit in with the Puerto Ricans either because they didn't speak Spanish, you know, so it was just them. It was just like them. That was it. But it's a fascinating thing. It's like, how do some people express who they are in this weird system? Because like in Night of Living Rez, there's a moment where Dee is trying to use the bathroom, and the janitor asks about the caterpillars up on the reservation, if people recall that moment. And he's like, how's that caterpillar stuff going on up on the res over there? And Dee says, how do you know I'm native or whatever? And he's like, sure, it says Penobscot. You know, so the clothing says it. And like you think about people who are like jihadis and stuff, like, you know that there's an identity there. But for indigenous people, there's really no, it can be difficult. I'm gonna have to start wearing a ribbon shirt, you know, or like turquoise Navajo stuff. I don't know. Like,
well, I think that's what you were talking about earlier, like playing into, oh, you have to like do the dance to say that you're native, basically.
Like if you go to Google and like type in Native American, all you'll see is Western Plains natives and then Deb Holland. Really, like with headdresses and stuff like that. Like that's Google's, like that's what people see. That like, when you say Native American, that's what they envision. And there's even a tribe in one of the North or South Carolina, the Band of Cherokee. Every year they do this. They used to. I don't know if they still do, but they have this like kind of like a community days thing, but it invites tourists, and they put on a play, and they put on regalia and stuff, and they perform this some traditional thing, a traditional story, which I think is traditional to them, but the clothing, the regalia, it's all Western Plains regalia. It's not because like you show up and your expectation is to see, you know, those gorgeous, you know, pieces, but then you go to the Cherokees and all they have is like one little like feather, you know, like that was like their get up, you know, like so it's like you'd be disappointed. So they knew that they had to they knew they had to do it. Yeah. They knew they did. And so it's kind of like, well, what's the big deal? And it's like, well, do they talk to the children about this? Like, do they tell the children, like, this isn't what we do? Like, the children grow up seeing it, native children, and they internalize it, and they're like, will they one day forget? You know what I mean? So there's problems with that. Mm-hmm. But as a selling point, it's like, how do you sell who you are to people, and that's also part of the book here as well, because you can't talk about it without, you can't understand the characters, I don't think, without asking the question.
Well, I think Charles says in the book that he's not native, but he feels native because of Frederick's love. He loved him so much that Charles felt from him, part of what he was part of. And then he said, blood only matters enough to keep us alive. But then meanwhile, his only ties to Elizabeth are blood. So there's like, he's a little confused about that as well, but he kind of feels, he's culturally linked to the native culture. So that's...
Yeah, I really don't think blood matters. I don't like being like, yeah, sure it does. Like, I mean, I think there's if you share blood with somebody, yeah, it matters. But like, how many of you consider somebody to be like your brother or sister and you have no relationship? Like, you have no real actual ties blood-wise with them?
He wants to raise hands? Or
what?
He wants to raise hands?
No, because I don't want to be embarrassed if somebody knows. I saw someone shaking their head back there, but it's true,
Yeah.
And I have a friend who I recently reconnected with. It was my age. We hadn't talked for a long time, but who had cervical cancer. No eggs frozen. In Spain, surrogacy is illegal, so they're going to Argentina and to have a child. And this baby will not have any DNA of hers, yet she still sees the child as being her child, and it's like a profound thing, to have that mentality. So,
well, even if you go back to the book, like Bobby is essentially Charles's brother by the end. I mean, he like loves Charles's mom probably more than Charles does, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of good examples the other way too.
Yeah.
Of family is whoever you want it to be. You can be whoever you want to be, basically. Yeah.
I mean, and when I grew up in Connecticut with my dad, it's a very, very weird. Just read The Gambler online. Just go look for The Gambler. It's on Narrative Magazine. You'll see the family I'm talking about. I love them dearly, but they were grandma and grandpa to me. No blood connection. They were grandma and grandpa. And even though I had two other parents, another set, they felt more like grandma, more like a grandma and grandpa. Except for my Grammy on the Rez. That one she was tied with them, but with no blood connection. Yet I still saw them as like my grandparents. Yep.
Do you have any?
Yep.
So I guess we're to the end of our discussion, since we both yepped each other.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for Morgan?
Throw them at me. Yeah.
Just last night read your story, Preppers.
Oh, the prepper, yeah. Did you like it?
I did like it.
Okay.
Yeah. There was a lot going on. It seemed to me a lot of reference to current situations, current social problems.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you had those in mind before you started the story, or first of all, I guess, is that even something that you had?
Oh, about
just you had this great idea for a story. You wrote it, and that other stuff was just part of it.
Yeah, so the piece he's talking about, the preppers, actually was published originally in a book in a native anthology called Never Whistle at Night. I'm not. Is that's where you read it? Oh, okay. It's actually, you can read it now online at Narrative Magazine. Another reason why. Gambler, and then the Prepper. You can read both of them there for free. And you sign up and you don't get bombarded with emails. I swear to God you don't.
So wait, is that on your website or?
The Prepper?
Oh, the Gambler.
Oh, the Gamblers. I don't know. But I don't know if, I think, if I get the opportunity, like, I talked about like the story giving, or like, I'm like, okay, I can do this much, but the story needs to have this much say, and it's sort of like reciprocity, I feel. if I get the moment to like have an opportunity to like elevate an idea through action or scene, I'm gonna grab it, you know. But I think a lot of it is just sort of like a subconscious, like this is how I'm thinking about stuff in the context of this story and the real world. And the Prepper is a wildly different. It's like I would say it's literary fiction, but it's also more genre-y. It's about a guy who is prepping for the end of like the zombie apocalypse. Yeah, but is there one to come? You'll have to find out. But yeah, the ideas of like hoarding and like saving and
so much end of life.
Yeah, end of life care.
How we treat people that are dying.
Yeah. That's.
And then he could buy all the guns. He bought a lot of guns.
Bought a lot of guns in that book. He did.
Without any clearly was.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that actually. Yeah, being able to just go and buy a bunch of guns and having severe mental illness. That is a problem. Yeah, that is a problem.
You're just pointing out problems.
I'm just pointing out problems now. I'm like, this is a problem. This is a problem. This is a problem for some reason. Yeah. But I never intend for my work to be political. You know, like I don't even consider, like when I wrote this, I was like, I'm not writing a political book. I'm just writing a character-driven book. My first ever mentor and teacher was like, no, like when I wrote stuff, and I swear to God, this guy he's retired now, but he taught at the community college, and he could have been like a Maxwell Perkins editor. Like he was that brilliant. And like we've been back in touch because like I'm like, who are you? Like all these years later, I'm like, you are like the guy who Tom Jenks, Narrative Magazine again, who founded Narrative with his wife Carol. What made Tom famous as an editor was, how many people have read The Garden of Eden by Hemingway? Couple people. Yeah, it's not like the most. That book was only half done, and Tom, as a very 20-something-year-old at the publishing house, the head editor said, Tom, finish Hemingway's novel. And Tom did. Tom wrote the rest of Hemingway's novel. And he wrote it because he was able to see the blueprint Hemingway had embedded there. And he's written 2 articles about it. And people are always like, did Tom Jenks write The Garden of Eden or did Hemingway, right? But this guy, my teacher, I paid Tom, I'm friends with Tom, but I paid Tom, I was like, critique my story or whatever, you know, do a manuscript critique. And then I had my former teacher do one, and I'm going to compare, you know, a community college teacher to a well-regarded literary editor and just ultimately be like, this guy's better than you.
Well,
no, but not like that. But
I think like having hung out with a lot of English majors, because a lot of my friends in college were English majors, I think there's like community colleges littered with like great editors who just aren't good at parties or something. You know, like they're not good at like schmoozing, and there's something that kept them back from.
This person, he went to my recent book reading, and his wife was there. And I was like, don't let him leave because he will. He doesn't. That's just how he is. And first time I ever met him, he listened to me read at the community college, like at the end of the creative writing class, and I sat back down, and he was like, can I borrow that for a second? It was my little story I'd read. I was like, yeah, sure. And then like I looked back a minute later, and he was like flying out the door. Like you never really see him. He was always over email, and that's how he kind of taught too most of his classes, because he lived on Swans Island, and that's a haul, you know, to get to EMCC. But going back to the Prepper and Tom Jenks and this random mentor I just mentioned, Narrative Magazine is a really good magazine because it offers literature free across the world for anybody who has internet access, and it's found its way in schools where normally literature would not be accessible because they have no books or anything, right? So definitely check it out, subscribe, support them. If you're a writer, don't submit stories just because it costs way too much. to submit a story there. But yeah, politically, I kind of think they just emerge, I think, kind of naturally out of it, because I try to stay clear of politics unless I'm talking to myself in the mirror. Yeah, I don't know. Thank you, though. But read The Prepper, yeah. It's also part of a story collection I'm working on, but I won't say anymore, because then we'll keep going and going and going. Someone else had a question, though.
Bobby, you had a question.
Oh, I did. I'm not sure.
He's like, I forgot it now.
Well, I was just thinking in terms of. Well, I was watching an interview with Percival Everett the other day, and he was talking about how he had a book about Dionysus that he couldn't get published for a long time, and an editor who had turned it down said, "I'm having a hard time seeing how this relates to Black life in America," and he was like, "It doesn't." And so I was just wondering, sometimes it seems that writers are kind of put into a box, particularly if they're a member of a traditionally oppressed group.
Mm.
And I was wondering, how do you write knowing that you could be maybe possibly pigeonholed in that way, or with the expectation, maybe some people have the expectation of your work being a form of activism or something like that. So how do you just focus on the story and get rid of all that stuff?
That's a great question. It actually goes back to my very first teacher. He was like, leave these ideas, leave all of this stuff. He's like, leave it to the critics, leave it to the reviewers, leave it to readerships to talk about it, right? He's like, your job is to tell a story. And like, he just whipped me in shape, and so like that's always been my mentality, is to like follow craft. But at the same time, I feel an obligation to kind of transgress at times, just because of that reason of being like, I don't want my book to be like, I don't want that to happen to other people, right? Because I don't want a native writer to be told, oh, well, we'll publish this if you change them to native character. You know what I mean? Like, that's a no, like I don't want that to happen. And if I have like any ability at all to change that narrative, then I'm gonna seize that opportunity, not necessarily in fiction, but in like essays. The Esquire piece, did you read the Esquire piece?
I did.
You did. It's a pretty scathing one, right? Like, and not just about non-natives, but natives in general. And ever since my mom passed away, she's kind of like, I think, come into my body, and I'm just like, will fight anybody. I don't know, like, because that's how she was. She was like, yeah, she was. But
I love the one you said about your aunt that works on the reservation, and how she said not to was that the one she said? Not to publish? Yeah. She said not to publish until I retire.
Yeah, she told me not to publish the Esquire article until she retired. I was like, well, you're retiring in May, and she was like, fuck, because people would, you hear blood quantum, people freak out. But for me to navigate it, writing for me is a whole other thing. I have to go in and separate myself from everything. But I also teach. I'm UMaine denied me acceptance as a student because I was so bad, but now I'm a professor there. So I teach creative writing and Native American and contemporary literature, and so like I'm there. Basically able to educate students on like, how do we read books, like how do we decompartmentalize like what has been categorized and put into place. And so there's one place where I do it. I think there's a lot of, and like tonight we've been talking a lot about it as well, I think. And so that was your question, right? Like, where do I do it, or how, or can I, or do I feel an obligation? Yeah, I feel an obligation, except when I go to the page for fiction. Maybe one day that'll change, though. Maybe one day I'll be like, I'm going to write an allegorical novel that is like a critique of, the system or something. But like, I feel like I have all these other outlets that help me do it. along with people who are also doing it too. Like, it's not just me, there are a lot of people who recognize it. Like, you recognize it, so it's like, it's a thing we all see. It's just a matter of like getting the powers to be, to, I don't know, trip or something, right? So you can take their place and then reshape the world. I don't know. I hope that answers the question.
I'm curious because I was wondering if that ever came up as an issue, the fact that your protagonist was white. Was that ever like an issue?
No, but I was hoping it would be. I really was. There was actually some post somebody showed me. I hadn't seen it. It was a native person. Said, "Why are native? Why something about like why is a native person writing using a white protagonist or something?" And I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. Like, I think the question. The very fact that I did that is what, you know what I mean? Like, there's the problem right there that you just have to say that.
Do you ever like, and I don't know if wrestle is the word, but like, do you ever come back with someone and say like, I'm also 75% white? And do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That in like a,
No, yeah. No, I mean, I've never been like, this is my percentage breakdown.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I just don't. I just am like, I'm indigenous is what I say. Is like, I don't, the quarter I actually was like made like a quarter shape. I'm just like what, it's a number. Like, for me, like, being indigenous, like I say in the article, I'm like, I think nobody knows what it's like to be indigenous.
Yeah.
I don't. I really do not. I'm like, you get some people who say this is how you're supposed to be if you're going to be Penobscot. You have others who are like, no, you don't need to do this. But it's like, I bet no native would go up to Donna Loring and be like, you're not native because you don't know the language. Because Donna Loring, if you know Donna Loring, does people know Donna Loring? No one knows Donna Loring? Oh, well, she was in Vietnam. She was the first tribal police female over on the reservation. She was in politics in Maine for a long time. She's got a bite, and she's on the board of trustees for the humane system. She's just, you don't mess with her, I do when I call her though. I call her and she's like, hello. I'm like, hello. She's like, yeah. I'm like, what? She's like, what do you mean what? And I'm like, why'd you call me? She's like, you called me. And like, she gets all worked up, but like, nobody would dare say that, right? Like, so I don't know. It's like, what? You said the question. What was the question?
I think I was.
Oh yeah, about percent. Yeah, I'm not. No one's gonna be like, you're not native because you can't do X. You're not. You can't make baskets, or you can't like. You don't know how to like canoe or like swim. Like to be an American. Like, what do you have to do to be an American? Be either born here or pass a test that is like
harder than most people.
Yeah, I would be deported if I had given that test. Yeah, or I'd be like, have to go and live on the res for the rest of my life. I don't know, but yeah.
No, I guess I was just asking, like, does your, because you do have white heritage as well.
Yeah.
Does that ever come into what you perceive as your identity?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, in a way, the other half is sort of like indigenous because it's Irish. My last name's Talty, and like I never really knew the extent to which it was like a really like Irish last name. But there's Taltys everywhere. There's actually a whole project around trying to figure out how the name wound up everywhere. Like there's like indigenous people in like Australia and New Zealand that have the last name Talty, and like it's strange. But I was in Ireland 2010, 2011, and I played basketball at the college there, and then I played for this club team, and the club owner came in, this really old, he must have been like 90 something, I swear, still drinking too, the Guinnesses and, the lifestyle and all of the, and he's like, where's the American kid? I want to meet him or whatever. And I went over and he asked my name. I said, Morgan Talty. And when he heard Talty, he kind of was like, and he's like, I haven't heard that name since I was a little boy or something. And so like the name's not really there anymore. It's like, it's from County Clare. And so like, but you think about Ireland and the Irish, while light-skinned, were indigenous. They were subjugated by the UK. Same with Scotland, right? We think about, keep thinking of friggin' Outlander show and books. But like indigeneity isn't just about like the Americas. It's everywhere, and so I do embrace that aspect. I don't pretend to be Irish though. Like I don't like like I'm not like give me a passport or something. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because like even the thing that I realized, and I was in my 20s at some point, was that nobody or very few people came to this country willingly or because they were having a good time where they were before. So, and what we have, even if you look past native culture, is mostly oppressed cultures who have come to the US and then started fighting with each other because they were told to dance by the people who ran everything, and then they just started, instead of like acting out against the people. Because I was talking to someone a couple of weeks ago, and I have some Scottish ancestors because, as I said, white people love to go on ancestry.com and find percentage of people. But they moved, to Northern Ireland, and then someone was Irish, and they were like, well, "Fuck them! Those are the colonizers." And I'm like, they got sold by their families for like so they could graze sheep, and then they got sent there by the British because they hated the Irish. And it's just like a big cycle of in most people's backgrounds, it's a big cycle of oppressed people oppressing other oppressed people.
That's the system. Yeah, that is how that's what colonization does. Is it once it colonizes, it starts to then internalize that colonization. And that's why, like in the Esquire piece, I described this moment where it was me and my girlfriend, now wife, this is way back, and I was talking to this native woman at a social or powwow, and I was like introduced my girlfriend to her, and she's like, wouldn't really talk to my girlfriend at all because she was white, and then right before she left, like she patted me on the arm and she's like, "You should find yourself a nice native girl," and in my mind it's like, for what reason? Is it for blood reason, right? Or is it because they're white? You know what I mean? And like they associate it with trauma and tragedy, you know what I mean? So indigenous people have been colonized. Everybody has been colonized, and the oppressed continue to oppress other people. And this was a thing that happened. People tried to fight me with Burn, the short story Burn, when that came out. Not in the book, but as a story, because I have the line where Dee says, "Natives damning natives," right? And somebody was like, Facebook messaged me and was like, "How dare you say, bring that, say something like that," and yada yada yada. And I'm like, well, why the other day were you just praising Tommy Orange's There about the ending, where it's all a bunch of native people shooting at each other and killing everyone? And she was like, well, that's a good point.
Well, you just spoiled Thomas' book, though.
He doesn't care though.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tommy says, absolutely smolders, ruined my novel. Yeah. I'm sorry if I actually ruined There for people.
Oh, I already read it.
Okay, okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily expect you to be able to, but the blood quantum, it's, don't the tribes feel like if they adhere to that they are going to themselves? So if they follow that federal guideline and they all do it differently, but they do it willingly on some level, doesn't that feel like they're doing it to themselves? I don't understand that. It's like, I would say, screw that. I'm going to just live my life as an indigenous person, whether I'm 100% white or not, because this is my life. And I'm not going to play by their rules, because their rules are the ones who damage them. So
Yeah. No, I get your question, and I can answer it to a degree. It's like, that's the thing, is I think some tribes are just afraid of like, well, what pass? What can we actually like? So in 1978, there's a Supreme Court case called Santa Clara Pueblo versus Martinez, and they were a patrilineal society at the time, and still are. Traditionally, they were not. And this woman, Martinez, right? And since that's at the Supreme Court, she had children with a guy who's native but wasn't Santa Clara Pueblo, and she wanted her children to be enrolled in the Santa Clara Pueblo tribe, but they were like, no, because the father is not Santa Clara Pueblo. So she sued, saying that the tribe did not have the inherent sovereignty to make that decision. And the Supreme Court ruled, no, we can't get involved in internal tribal affairs, which set the standard for tribes, federally recognized tribes, to be able to put into play whatever they want. But I think one of the fears is it's like, what if we do something completely different and the United States doesn't like it? Because the United States has, from Lone Wolf versus Hitchcock, another huge court case, plenary power, which means at any moment they can say, you're no more natives, like you're done. Like that, they could.
Hey, this is John, and it is the next day, and I'm editing the video, and I just found out that at this point in the video, the audio cut out. Apparently, our microphone batteries had died. So the rest of the talk, there is no audio, and I'm sorry about that. We got a little bit into some land acknowledgement statements, which Morgan definitely has opinions on that you can find online. We also talked a little bit more about setting the scene and minutiae in his writing. And we discussed a few other things. There's about 15 minutes after this. But this is the end of the recording. Thank you for watching. And if you're interested in learning more, including some of the things we discussed later in this program, check out some of Morgan's other interviews and work on his website or just online. And The Prepper and The Gambler are both free on Narrative Magazine online. Just search for those things, and those are great pieces as well by Morgan. Thanks again.